We're back.
Watch the hands.
We're back. Again, we have our good and dear friend Curt Rayvis with us, with a totally different subject this time. Not the marijuana issue, but we're going to talk a little bit about climate. And there's a connectivity between the two, and he'll go into that, the health of the land and the growing particular crops or not growing particular crops. But first of all, I'm David Stevenson. Emily Volt-Podesta and I are co-hosts. And Curt Rayvis is our esteemed guest again, and we're going to talk about climate. Sir, lead it off.
Yeah, let's talk about the march that we just had this past weekend.
It's really hard for me to talk about the march because I wasn't there. I could not make it.
All right.
But what I did know, just the basic facts, they were hoping for 100,000. Apparently they got 300,000.
Okay.
I don't know how close they were able to get to the UN. That was a target that they may or may not have been able to achieve, was to bring this protest directly to the United Nations front door. But we're not guaranteed the right to petition the United Nations for a redress of grievances because it's not the U.S. government.
Okay.
So apparently they had high security in place to make sure we didn't get too close to foreign leaders who would see that Americans are unhappy about climate change. But it was a great turnout from what I understand, and I'm looking forward to talking with people who were there.
Quick shout out to our other good friend, Rich Frascone, who regularly talks about climate on Who's Telling the Truth. And I think he's going to focus his show. Now, this show won't air till Thursday, but his Monday show, Monday 7 to 8, he'll be probably talking a lot about that tonight. So you can probably catch that on a repeat.
And Tom Swan on our last show.
Or on the internet,
right,
on YouTube.
And our last guest we had was just talking about
Tom Swan, yeah.
He was saying, he was going to be there. He's for the...
I'm sure he will, yeah. It was a Connecticut Citizen Action Group. Yeah.
Yeah, he was going to bring a bunch of people down there.
Did a couple shows with Tom last week, and it was very interesting. And like the group that you also belong to, NORML, National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, Connecticut Citizen Action Group goes back to the 70s, founded by a fellow by the name of Ralph Nader, who was everybody's hero except when it comes to what happened in 2000. But
that's a bad rap. It wasn't his fault.
Fair enough. I think it is a bad rap also that to discourage somebody from running for president just because it may impact the outcome of the election. We need to have more than two political parties, and I think that's probably
like in Italy or Europe.
Most other places, in Israel, they've got numerous political parties, and then they form coalition governments. And why can't we do that in America? So we can vote on issues rather than on candidates.
Do you want an answer to that question? Why we can't do that in America?
Go ahead.
Yeah, why?
Because in America, and now especially after Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court, most Americans realize that the key people in Congress have been bought by special interests who put a lot of money into their political campaigns. People like Mitch McConnell, who's received millions and millions of dollars over his career from special interests who he now works for, not the people of Kentucky. And maybe that will rear its head this November when people take a stand. But it's the money in Washington. The special interest money in Washington has kept every good program from being enacted, because those special interests don't want those programs enacted. They know exactly who to contribute to in Congress to make something happen or stop it from happening.
So how are we going to deal with this issue of climate? Because we know, those of us that read on it and don't start with preconceived conclusions that some people do, we know that the climate is changing. We know that the Earth is getting warmer, albeit not suddenly. It's a very gradual process. We know that the ice caps are melting, and that's a bad thing, because the ice caps reflect a lot of the heat that comes from the sun, reflect it back out into space, and keep the planet moderate. But tell us more about some of the issues that were being voiced in this march, and what people are interested in. What points are we trying to get across to the United Nations, to our leaders, and to the world as far as about climate and how to what the problem is and how to correct it.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, we can argue all day, and people do, about how much climate change is natural for the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the extent to which man has actually made it worse, which shouldn't be a debatable issue. It's pretty clear how we have made the planet warmer.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide being...
Right.
And that's the problem.
Cutting down trees.
Carbon dioxide in and of itself traps heat inside the Earth's atmosphere. And this has been known since the 1800s when they started writing about what's going to happen if we keep industrializing the way we are, burning coal and sending all of this up into the atmosphere.
Right.
And at the time, they were talking about just a tiny fraction of what we put up into the atmosphere now,
Right.
even with all the coal-fired furnaces and plants there were in the 1800s. But the fear of the energy industry is renewables. Mm-hmm. Solar, wind, water power.
Right.
That's what they fear, because there's so much profit in oil, coal, and natural gas.
And not as much profit, although there's certainly they can be profitable if those companies make the transition from taking oil and gas and out of the ground and make that transition to building windmills and solar panels and things of that nature. They've got the opportunity to take their current profits and invest them into alternative energies. Well, hopefully they will.
There's a more important issue than who's responsible and what difference is it going to make if we stop now.
Right.
As it is now, sea levels by the end of this century will rise about 3 feet. Because of the melting in the northern ice cap.
Which is pretty significant when you think about it.
Well, it's significant because most of the world's population lives within a few miles of a coastline.
Mm-hmm. So 3 feet. So 3 feet will not only completely take out a lot of areas of coastline.
How about Miami?
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things that nobody wants to deal with is much of the city of Miami is going to have to be moved inland. Who's going to pay for this?
Yeah.
Where are they going to put these people? You've got millions of people in southern Florida who won't be able to live there in 85 years.
Yeah.
So if we start planning now for building new inland communities, then there's a chance that by the time this is happening later in the century, it won't be traumatic. But if we don't do this, and politicians are cowards when it comes to planning for the future, if they don't do this, we're going to be in crisis mode when the big storms happen that keep parts of Florida underwater.
Yeah.
And then in a crisis mode, all kinds of money gets wasted, all kinds of phony contractors show up because the money is there, and government has to put up money to show that they're trying to help people. All this will happen if it's not planned for well in advance. But to get people to think ahead and to spend money before it's urgent is a very difficult thing for politicians to do.
Forward thinking
and taking some hardship now to prevent a greater hardship in the future. I will never ever forget Jimmy Carter in 1979 making a speech where he said, America, 2 things I want to talk about tonight. He said, first, we have a $75 billion a year deficit. But if we just tighten our belts a little bit right now, we can have a balanced budget going into the future indefinitely. We can do that. We just have to tighten our belts a little right now, and we will have a balanced budget forever. Wow. That will keep interest rates low and keep America a great place for other countries to invest.
Right.
But he said the second thing is, if we commit now in 1979 to be free of oil, we can do that by the end of the century. We can be free of all oil, foreign or domestic.
Wow.
And part of the idea behind that was pollution control. Because anytime we burn fossil fuels, we're sending poisons, not just carbon dioxide, but all kinds of poisons up into the atmosphere. And for people like the Koch brothers, it's less expensive for them to pay the fines on their pollution than to actually do anything about it. The fines are just a slap on the wrist. They're happy to pay them. And they get to write those off as a business expense.
Yeah, it's always been like that. Yeah.
Here's a nuance that I read the other day. something that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that this person that wrote this article wanted to bring this to the attention of the United Nations when they're discussing the issue of climate change and how to deal with it. Now, it makes a difference whether you reforest closer to the equator or if we reforest further away from the equator. Why is that? Well, it's because the trees in the rainforest, probably specifically, but closer to the equator, they serve a useful purpose, whereas trees that are further away from the equator, they actually block some of they keep snow and ice and things that reflect the heat back into space, whereas the trees that are out in that area that are, if you reforest where there's with the colder climates further away from the equator, they're going to absorb more sunlight, so they actually can have somewhat of a negative effect.
Interesting.
Whereas the trees that are reforested closer to the equator have an extremely major positive effect.
And of course, the effect we're talking about is more trees mean more carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere.
Exactly.
Right.
So I don't know why they're cutting more trees down.
Well, that's the argument for hemp paper right there.
Right.
Is leaving the trees alone. We don't need to cut trees.
Yeah.
We don't need them for building anymore. We don't need them for construction, and we don't need them for paper.
Yeah, and it's like I was driving on 84 just yesterday, and on the barriers between, you see just cutting trees down. And what are they cutting all these trees down for?
That may have some reference to trees that are like near power lines and whatnot, or that hang over roadways.
It's in the middle of the
Because they have
highway.
to do some of that. Because it's Connecticut. Connecticut has actually more trees now. We're one of the few states. We actually have more trees now than we did. You'd have to go back before the Pilgrims arrived.
100 years ago, Brookfield had no trees.
Wow.
It was deforested. It was all grazing land.
Farmland. Yep.
And when you look at Brookfield now, you would never believe that 100 years ago there were no trees.
It's all new growth forest. Yeah.
Wow. Now, I have a question about when you said Carter, mentioned there were these problems. How come we didn't do anything back then about?
Because right after Carter came on television to make that speech, the Republican reply came from Ronald Reagan, who accused the Democrats of doom and gloom mentality. He said, no, there's plenty of oil for way beyond the foreseeable future. We're not going to run short of oil. It's still the best form of energy and the cheapest form of energy.
We were already importing a lot of our oil from
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Wow.
Iran. We used to get a lot of oil from Iran till 1980, till the Shah was gone. We had a sweet deal with Iran as long as the Shah was in power. The big challenge of climate change is not pointing the finger of blame.
Right.
It's preparing for the practicalities of what's coming.
Yeah.
It's true. What's behind us is behind us.
Yeah.
We have to look forward and deal with the problem going forward, rather than worrying about what caused it. Although, what caused, knowing the past is a benchmark to dealing with the future better.
Also, identifying those who have been the worst polluters.
Right.
Those are the people who should be now putting money into the system to fix this.
Yeah.
Now, on this deficit question that you mentioned that Carter talked about how we had, at that point had this astronomically high $75 million, was it?
Billion.
Billion. Okay, $75 billion annual deficits. Now, a fellow by the name of Reagan comes in, and we immediately went from $75 billion annual deficits up into the I'm going to say about $300 billion.
Yep.
They quadrupled that very quickly after.
That's right.
With Reagan with his tax cuts.
He tripled our national debt in 8 years.
Wow.
Wow, that's not a very memorable thing about him.
No.
Not a very conservative thing to do either.
Hardly fiscally responsible. Hardly, yeah.
Huh.
And then the other guy, of course, we had Bill Clinton, where we had balanced budgets for a few of the years that he was president. But then the fellow that followed him, we went immediately to $500 million, $500 million budgets over Bush's 8 years on average.
But I think it's important that this issue with climate change is affecting the whole world.
Nobody wants to pay for it.
Right.
However, it should be noted that the countries leading in renewable energy technologies right now are number 1, China, number 2, India, number 3, the United States. So when people in this country say, yeah, but China's going to do this and India's going to do that, right now they are leading the way in renewable energy. In fact, if anybody watched the World Cup, the main sponsor of the World Cup was a Chinese renewable energy company, a Chinese solar company.
Wow.
And they were the main sponsor of the World Cup this year at FIFA.
That's good to note, and I think China is learning the lesson quickly because they've gone from being a nation of bicycle riders to a nation of car drivers in a very short period of time. And their pollution, particularly in their cities, has been horrific.
Yeah.
The health problems that have developed out of that. But they seem to have recognized that.
Well, they're all wearing face masks riding their bikes now, so they know there's a problem.
So it sounds like, and I know that when our friend Marty Heiser loves to talk about Solyndra, the company that went bankrupt after money, our government money, some of it was invested in it.
Starting with George W. Bush, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's something that people don't, they're short-sighted in remembering when that started. But they went out of business principally because the Chinese government started pouring huge amounts of money into renewable energy, much more than the United States has.
Yes.
So there's a feather in their cap, and there's and of course there have been a lot of American companies that have the renewable energy companies that have had a lot of government loans, and they're doing fine. It's just the one Solyndra that seems to pop up pop out of the parrot's mouth, so to speak.
And this is recently that China has started doing this?
No, actually, they've been doing this now for at least the last 10 years.
Right.
But they also are planning to control the world's supply of oil as best they can going forward also. They're buying potential oil locations around the world. Oil futures and new areas of exploration. The Chinese are spending huge amounts of money to secure the rights to different areas for drilling. They consider that the strategic resource of the future as far as world control. And the Chinese, the way they operate is all through business. Their form of warfare is business. So they're not interested in, bodies and weapons and explosions. They're interested in making more money and controlling the world's economy, which they're pretty good at right now. I have a hard time now finding anything that's not made in China.
No, it's true. Now, they've only recently gone from being communist to, capitalist.
They're kind of an odd combination.
They're a hybrid.
Odd hybrid of...
It just as Russia is now a hybrid, but mostly capitalistic. But still a hybrid.
I'm sure it's nothing's regulated or, how they do business.
Was there anything in the marijuana show that you wanted to either reiterate or cover a little bit more thoroughly? We did a marijuana show prior to this and talked about the new marijuana laws in Connecticut. Curt being a member of National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws for, what did you say, 42 years?
42 years, 1972.
And
wow.
So you maybe were one of the charter members then, huh?
No, there were still several thousand before me.
Oh, okay. So how does this? How do we segue from climate and energy to marijuana? And I know exactly how you're going to go. Where you're going to go, but go ahead.
Currently, and I don't know the number of acres, the amount of acreage that's being destroyed in equatorial rainforests every day. It's being destroyed for grazing purposes, for cattle. It's being cut down for paper and pulp. One of the things that hemp offers is, for the world climate, is...
And hemp's kind of the sister plant of marijuana. It's got everything except the THC.
Yes. So everything that is needed for clothing fiber and for paper fiber is the hemp plant, which again has no drug recreational value. And that will enable trees to not have to be cut. Cattle grazing has gotten out of control in this world, and for them to be cutting down rainforests to graze cattle is not a good thing.
Right.
Was it you that told me that the Declaration of Independence and those other documents that evolved
Hemp paper.
came out were printed on hemp?
Hemp paper.
Huh.
Okay.
Hemp paper was the most commonly used paper in the colonies.
Wow.
Before they went to wood.
Well, yeah, I mean, paper was expensive. Hemp paper was cheap. Still is.
Well,
Wow.
plants apparently pretty easy to grow, huh? And you mentioned also about the cotton industry and the fact that hemp is actually more durable than cotton fiber.
It's a weed.
So it grows pretty easily.
It grows pretty easily on it is indigenous to every continent in the world except Antarctica.
And that's why they call it weed, because it's a...
Is its effect on the soil? How's its effect on the soil relative to cotton?
It renitrates the soil.
Oh.
It actually renourishes the soil
Wow.
after it's harvested.
So it doesn't deplete it,
It
like
does
most
not deplete
crops.
the soil like most crops.
Oh. So you think,
Possibly also. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say the biggest problem is that a lot of industries are against hemp and marijuana because it just threatens so many
threatens
other...
their profit centers.
Pharmaceutical
simple.
companies.
It's that simple. It threatens probably, if not hundreds of billions, tens of billions of revenue stream dollars to companies that honestly don't deserve it.
Right.
We don't need cotton anymore. We don't need to cut down trees for paper anymore.
If we ever did need cotton.
Right, yeah.
Well, cotton's a nice fiber. Hey, who doesn't like cotton?
Right.
But
Fabric of our lives.
this shirt that I'm wearing is made from hemp fiber.
Okay.
It's as soft as any of my cotton shirts.
Wow.
I've had it for many years, and it wears like iron.
That's what you were saying too. Hemp lasts longer, more
Hemp
durable.
lasts 8 times longer than cotton.
So it's more durable.
More durable, cheaper to grow, with no environmental impact, unlike cotton.
And it almost seems that any time there's been prohibition in this country, it has had something to do politically. I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as many people know by now, cannabis, marijuana, was associated in the early part of the last century with Mexicans. The Mexicans.
Right.
Red Mexicans, huh?
Where people were afraid of Mexicans coming up here with this wacky tobacco they brought. That we don't know about this stuff. And
some wonderful friends.
These people seem scary. They have dark skin.
Yeah.
So it was a way to have leverage over poor black people and Mexicans in areas where they wanted an excuse to harass and
it's true.
Persecute people of color.
And even the Chinese with opium and any kind of minority. Yeah.
Well, the one thing that's true around this world is that some people will always want a recreational drug for recreational use.
Yeah.
Whether it's alcohol, marijuana, cocaine.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few other things, opium at one time. But people will want this. A certain percentage of people will want this, whether it's legal or not.
Right.
And they'll get it because they want it, and somebody will make it available because there's a customer.
Right, yeah.
So if it's...
that will never change.
So if it's decriminalized at the very least, but even to the point of being legalized and taxable, so that some of the money is going toward
tax revenue,
toward things that the government does on our behalf, roads, et cetera, and not going to some drug lord somewhere.
Right.
The other little secret is in every state that has decriminalized marijuana, usage has gone down in those states.
Right.
Colorado it's too soon to know what that's going to be like because it's still in the first year of legalization.
Right.
Yeah.
But eventually Colorado expects that their overall usage will drop down to below what it was before legalization.
Right.
The thrill is gone if it's not illegal.
I was going to say, I wonder if a lot of the allure of marijuana is the fact that it's illegal.
It was for me and my friends in 1972. It was part of every Vietnam War protest in 1972.
Yeah. No, I'm sure. Once the forbidden fruit.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now the notion that hemp it grows everywhere, that it's replenishes the nitrogen in the soil. I'm guessing that it may, in fact, also be more insect resistant, as most weeds are.
Absolutely.
So the use of pesticide is diminished.
Unnecessary to use pesticides. Unnecessary to use fertilizers, chemical fertilizers.
Yeah, it's...
I'm going back and look at some of the questions that maybe didn't get to.
No, I just think a lot of it is political. You know, I was just saying how I know someone who works in the pharmaceutical industry, and you know, she just seemed to be getting so upset about like, oh, marijuana, and they haven't done any clinical trials, and why don't these people just take regular drugs that have been tested, and it just seems to be affecting so many people. I didn't realize how it was affecting people, corporations. Yeah. People were getting so threatened by it, you know.
I think it's safe to say that if the pharmaceutical companies had figured out how to make profit on marijuana, it would have been legal a long time.
Right, exactly.
It's just the fact, as you mentioned in the first show, about it grows everywhere, and in a lot of states, people can grow a limited number of plants for their own personal use.
If you are a special interest opposed to marijuana, let's say you're a pharmaceutical lobbyist, you know exactly who to go to at the Committee on Health, Education, and Welfare, the chairman or the ranking member, to contribute lots of money to his campaign so that he will not allow legislation to get through his committee that people would actually like having. Here's a wonderful statistic.
Okay.
Currently, over 50% of the American people favor legalizing marijuana, ending the prohibition, making it available the same as tobacco and alcohol. Not one senator out of 100 senators, not one senator is willing to get up on the floor of the Senate and ask for an end to the prohibition, even though more than half of the American people want that, and in some states, way more than half of the people in that state want legalization.
Wow,
not one senator.
There's politics over people rather than people over politics.
And I'm hoping that Chris Murphy will be the one to actually bring this up on the floor.
Once it happens, it'll probably happen in a very cascading type fashion. But we're going to have to end it there. We've done 2 shows now with Curt, one about climate change and one about Connecticut's change in marijuana laws and the function of the dispensaries that have been approved throughout the state of Connecticut. It's Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. I'm Levo Pontesta, co-hosts, and the esteemed Curt Rayvis, who's a thinking man's thinking man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Emily.